I'm not standing for some small-town judge. I pay more in taxes than he earns." The words cut through the Providence municipal courtroom like a challenge. Preston Hale remained seated at the defendant's table, arms crossed, chin lifted in defiance. Officer Mendez, the bailiff, had called all rise 3 times. Preston hadn't moved once. "Sir," Officer Mendez said firmly, "when the judge enters, everyone stands. That's not optional." "Everything is optional when you have enough money. Haven't you learned that yet?" Judge Frank Caprio walked to his bench and observed the scene. A 38-year-old man in a tailored suit refusing to acknowledge the most basic sign of respect for the court. It wasn't the first time someone had tried this, but it might have been the most deliberate. What Preston Hale didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the 72-year-old disabled veteran he had nearly run down 3 weeks ago was not just any victim. Harold Watkins had served 2 tours in Vietnam. He had taken shrapnel to both legs during the Tet Offensive, and 49 years ago, in a rice paddy 10,000 miles from Providence, he had dragged a wounded 19-year-old soldier to safety under enemy fire. That soldier's name was Charles Hale, Preston's father, the man whose fortune Preston had inherited, the man who had built an empire on the foundation of being saved by the very veteran his son had nearly killed. And Judge Caprio knew every detail. "Tell us where you're watching from," because what happened next in this Providence courtroom became one of the most shared moments in judicial history. The clock showed 10:11 a.m. Thursday morning. Case number 2026-TR-4419 was about to become something Preston Hale would remember for the rest of his life. Ms. Donnelly adjusted her microphone. The tension in the room was unmistakable. Everyone could feel that something unprecedented was unfolding. Case number 2026-TR-4419, the City of Providence versus Preston William Hale. Charges include reckless driving, harassment, willful disregard for pedestrian safety, and contempt of court. "I'm not responding to charges read by a clerk," Preston said, still seated. "My lawyers handle this kind of thing." "Mr. Hale," Judge Caprio said calmly, "you are currently in contempt of court for refusing to stand. Would you like to add to that charge, or would you like to participate in these proceedings like a civilized adult?" "I'd like to know why I'm here at all. This is a waste of my time." 10:13 a.m. Defendant refuses to stand for judge. Contempt noted. Bailiff on standby. Proceedings continue under protest. Judge Caprio studied the man in front of him. 38 years old. Inherited his father's real estate empire 5 years ago. No prior convictions, but a file thick with complaints that had been settled quietly. Harassment of employees, verbal abuse of service workers, a pattern of behavior enabled by unlimited resources. "Mr. Hale, I have in front of me footage from a parking lot camera, an officer's report, a witness voicemail, and a text message screenshot. Would you like to explain what happened on the afternoon of September 19th? "Nothing happened. Some old man was shuffling across a parking lot like he had all day. I honked. He overreacted. According to the footage, you came within 2 feet of striking him with your vehicle. He should have moved faster. He's 72 years old with combat injuries that affect his mobility." Preston shrugged. "Not my problem." The arrogance in Preston's voice was a performance, but Judge Caprio had spent decades reading defendants. Underneath the bravado, he could see something else, the particular kind of insecurity that comes from inheriting power rather than earning it. "Mr. Hale, let me ask you something. When you refused to stand for this court, what did you think would happen? I thought you'd understand that I'm not like the other people who come through here. I don't need to follow the same rules." "Why not?" "Because I own half of downtown Providence. I employ 300 people. I donate to charities that this court has probably never heard of. I matter." "And Harold Watkins doesn't?" "Who?" "The man you nearly struck. The veteran." Preston waved his hand dismissively. "Old people should stay out of parking lots if they can't move. It's common sense." Text screenshot submitted as evidence. From Preston to business associate, dated day of incident. "Some old guy in a parking lot today. Almost clipped him LOL. Courts bow to money in this state. My lawyers will make it disappear by next week." Judge Caprio read the text aloud. Preston's smirk flickered. That text was private. It was submitted as evidence. The question is whether it accurately reflects your attitude toward this proceeding. I was joking with a friend. Courts bow to money. Is that what you believe, Mr. Hale? It's what I know. Officer Julian Baker took the witness stand. He was the responding officer who had arrived at the scene after multiple witnesses called 911. Officer Baker, can you describe what you observed when you arrived? Yes, Your Honor. I responded to a call about a reckless driving incident in the downtown parking structure. When I arrived, I found Mr. Watkins, the victim, leaning against a parked car. He was shaking. He told me a vehicle had come so close to hitting him that he felt the wind from it. Did you locate the defendant? Yes, Mr. Hale was still in the parking structure, apparently waiting for his reserved space to open up. When I approached and asked about the incident, he became immediately hostile. How so? He told me his time was worth more than my entire annual salary. He said I should be focusing on real crimes instead of harassing productive citizens. He also said, and I quote, "The old man was in my way. If he can't move, he shouldn't be in public." Did he acknowledge coming close to striking Mr. Watkins? He did. He said, and I quote, "I wish I had hit him, would have taught him to move faster." 10:24 a.m. Officer testimony in progress. Defendant showing no visible remorse. Gallery silent. Judge Caprio let the words hang in the air. I wish I had hit him. Is that what you said, Mr. Hale? Preston shifted in his seat, still refusing to stand, but no longer quite as comfortable. I was frustrated. The officer was being confrontational. The officer was taking a report about a near collision with an elderly veteran. He was taking forever. I had a meeting. Harold Watkins sat in the gallery, his hands folded in his lap. He was a small man, weathered by age and injury, with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned to endure pain without complaint. Mr. Watkins, Judge Caprio said gently, would you like to address the court? The elderly veteran rose slowly. His movements were careful. He used a cane, and each step seemed to require concentration. Your Honor, I don't walk fast. I haven't walked fast since 1968. I took shrapnel to both legs during the Tet Offensive. The doctor said I'd never walk again. I proved them wrong, but I can't prove physics wrong. I move slow because that's what my body allows. Please continue. When that car came at me, I froze. I couldn't move any faster than I was already moving. I thought I was going to die. Not in a rice paddy in Vietnam, but in a parking lot in Providence because some man in an expensive car didn't want to wait 5 seconds. Preston yawned audibly. Voicemail snippet submitted as evidence. From witness Maria Gonzalez. I was walking to my car when I saw the whole thing. The man in the Mercedes came flying around the corner like he owned the place. The old gentleman tried to move, but he has a cane. You could see him struggling. The car missed him by inches. And then the driver rolled down his window and screamed, "Move faster, old man!" I couldn't believe it. I called 911 immediately. Judge Caprio looked at Preston. Did you yell, "Move faster, old man," at Mr. Watkins? I don't remember exactly what I said. I was in a hurry. Mr. Watkins served 2 tours in Vietnam defending your freedom to be in a hurry. Does that change your perspective at all? Everyone has a sob story, Judge. It doesn't make him special. Preston's composure was solid, but cracks were beginning to show. The courtroom wasn't bending to his will the way he had expected. Mr. Hale, you mentioned that you donate to charities, that you matter to this community. Tell me about your family's foundation. Preston perked up. Finally, a chance to remind the room of his importance. The Hale Family Foundation donates over $2 million annually. We support hospitals, schools, and, among other things, veteran services. Veteran services? My father was very committed to veterans' causes. He served in Vietnam himself. I see. And do you know why your father was so committed to those causes? Preston hesitated. He saw things in the war. It affected him. Did he ever tell you specifics? Not really. He didn't like to talk about it. Case file note, revealed by court clerk at judge's request. Recipient of Hale Foundation's largest individual grant, 2019-2024. Providence Veterans Rehabilitation Center. Primary beneficiary of that center's services, Harold J. Watkins. Secondary note, Charles Hale, defendant's father, deceased 2021, personally established the grant after learning Harold Watkins was receiving care at the facility. Foundation records indicate Charles Hale visited Harold Watkins annually until his death, though no family members were informed of these visits. Judge Caprio read the note aloud. Preston's face changed. What? Your father visited Harold Watkins every year until he died, Mr. Hale. Did you know that? No, that doesn't make sense. It makes perfect sense when you understand the full story. Your father and Mr. Watkins served together in Vietnam. In 1968, during the Tet Offensive, your father was wounded and pinned down under enemy fire. He was 19 years old and bleeding out in a rice paddy. Harold Watkins was the medic who saved him. He dragged your father 300 yards through enemy fire. He lost mobility in both legs because he refused to leave your father behind. The courtroom went completely still. Preston stared at Harold Watkins. The elderly veteran hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. He simply sat there watching, with the same quiet dignity he had carried since the hearing began. Mr. Hale, Judge Caprio said, the man you nearly killed in that parking lot, the man you wished you had hit, saved your father's life. Everything you have, your inheritance, your company, your fortune, exists because Harold Watkins refused to leave a 19-year-old soldier behind in 1968. Preston's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Your father knew this. He spent decades quietly supporting Mr. Watkins. He visited him every year. He funded the rehabilitation center where Mr. Watkins receives care. And he never told you because, according to his private letters, which were submitted to this court, he was ashamed. Ashamed of what? Ashamed that his son had become the kind of person who would scream at an elderly veteran to move faster. Like this video if you missed Judge Caprio, because this is exactly the kind of moment that made his courtroom legendary. Harold Watkins finally spoke. Your father was a good man, son. He carried guilt for 50 years because I got hurt saving him. I told him 1,000 times. I'd do it again. That's what brothers do. But he never stopped trying to make it up to me. Preston's eyes were wet now. The last time I saw Charlie, that's what I called him, Charlie, was 2 months before he passed. He sat in my room at the rehab center and held my hand. He said, Harold, I'm sorry about my boy. I tried to teach him, but the money got in the way. He said that? He said a lot of things. He was worried about you, worried that you'd become someone who didn't understand what really matters. Preston covered his face with his hands. I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. Would it have changed what you did in that parking lot? Preston was silent for a long moment. I don't know. And that's the worst part. Judge Caprio waited until the emotion in the room had settled. Mr. Hale, I want to be very clear about what has just happened. You came into this courtroom believing your money made you untouchable. You refused to stand. You mocked the proceedings. You showed contempt for the very concept of accountability. Preston nodded. He was finally standing, not because he was ordered to, but because sitting felt wrong. And in the process, you revealed something far more troubling than arrogance. You revealed that you have no idea who you are, no idea where your fortune came from, no idea that the man you endangered is the reason you exist. I understand that now, Your Honor. I don't think you do, not yet, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to understand it. Sentencing timeline, case 2026 TR 4419, days 1 to 7. Written apology to Harold Watkins, court reviewed. Days 1, 160 hours community service at elder aid programs. Days 1 to 90. Complete respect and dignity training program. Day 160. Follow-up hearing to assess compliance and transformation. Here is what I'm ordering. First, you will write a letter of apology to Mr. Watkins. A real letter. Your own words. Your own understanding of what you did and why it was wrong. Yes, Your Honor. Second, you will complete 160 hours of community service at elder aid programs. You will work directly with elderly veterans and seniors. You will help them with daily tasks. You will listen to their stories. You will learn what your father apparently tried to teach you but failed. I understand. Third, you will complete a respect and dignity training program. You will learn, perhaps for the first time, that wealth is not authority, that money does not entitle you to treat other human beings like obstacles. Yes, sir. Finally, you will return to this courtroom in 160 days for a follow-up hearing. At that hearing, I will assess your compliance, your attitude, and your transformation. And if I find that you have reverted to the man who walked in here today, the consequences will be severe. Preston nodded. I won't revert, Your Honor, I promise. Don't promise me. Promise Harold Watkins. Promise your father's memory. The months that followed were unlike anything Preston Hale had ever experienced. He showed up at the Providence Elder Aid Center on his first day expecting to write a check and leave. Instead, he was handed a schedule of duties that included meal preparation, mobility assistance, and companionship visits. Case follow-up log. Week 3. Defendant has completed 32 of 160 required hours. Initial attitude described as uncomfortable but compliant. Staff notes defendant seems affected by conversations with elderly residents. Assigned to Veterans Support Wing. For the first 3 weeks, Preston barely spoke. He did his assigned tasks mechanically, serving meals, helping residents move between rooms, listening to stories he didn't fully understand. But by week 4, something shifted. There was a Korean War veteran named Eugene who had no family left. He spent his days in a wheelchair by the window, watching cars pass by. Preston was assigned to sit with him during meals. You're the Hale kid, Eugene said one afternoon. Yes, sir. Charlie's boy. Preston looked up sharply. You knew my father? Knew him. I served with him. Different unit, but we crossed paths. He talked about you all the time. Said you were going to do great things. Preston felt something crack inside his chest. I don't think I've done any great things. Not yet, but you're here. That's a start. By week 8, Preston had stopped counting his hours. He showed up because he wanted to, not because he had to. He learned the names of every resident in the Veterans Wing. He learned their stories, the battles they'd fought, the friends they'd lost, the quiet dignity they maintained despite bodies that were failing them. And he learned about his father. Not the businessman, not the philanthropist, the 19-year-old kid who had been bleeding out in a rice paddy, convinced he was going to die, until a medic named Harold Watkins refused to leave him behind. Week 14 brought the meeting Preston had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Harold Watkins came to the Elder Aid Center for a special event honoring local veterans. Preston saw him across the room and felt his stomach drop. He walked over slowly. Mr. Watkins? The elderly veteran looked up. Recognition flickered in his eyes. You're still here? Yes, sir. It's part of my sentence. But I would have come anyway. Would you? I've been learning about my father. Really learning. Not the version I knew. The businessman, the foundation chairman, the real version. The scared kid you saved in Vietnam. Harold's expression softened. Charlie was brave, you know, even when he was terrified. He kept talking the whole time I was dragging him. Kept telling me about his girl back home, his plans for the future. I think he thought if he stopped talking, he'd die. I didn't know any of this until that day in court. Charlie didn't like to talk about it. Made him feel weak, I think, needing to be saved. He wasn't weak, and neither are you. Harold studied him for a long moment. Your father would be proud of you right now. Not the man who walked into that courtroom, but the man standing in front of me. This man. Preston's eyes were wet. I don't know if I deserve that. You're earning it. That's what matters. 160 days after his initial hearing, Preston Hale returned to Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom. He looked different, not dramatically, no Hollywood transformation. But the arrogance was gone. The defiance had faded into something quieter, more grounded, but also more real. Mr. Hale, Judge Caprio said, I see you've completed all terms of your sentence. The 160 hours at the Elder Aid Center. The respect training completed. The letter delivered. Yes, Your Honor. The reports from the center say you continued volunteering after your required hours were complete. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. I go 3 times a week now. I'm on the board of the Veterans Wing. We're expanding the program next year. More beds, more services. That's significant. What changed? Preston took a breath. I met people who showed me what my father understood and I didn't. That wealth without purpose is just noise. That power without compassion is just bullying. That the measure of a person isn't what they have, it's what they give. Harold Watkins was in the gallery. He rose slowly, leaning on his cane. Your Honor, may I speak? Please, Mr. Watkins. The elderly veteran walked forward. When this started, I was angry. Not at Preston specifically, at what he represented. A generation that inherited everything and appreciated nothing. But I've watched this young man change. I've seen him scrubbing floors, feeding veterans, listening to stories that most people don't have patience for. He turned to Preston. Your father asked me once what I wanted in return for saving him. I told him I wanted him to raise good kids. He thought he'd failed. But standing here today, looking at you now, I think he succeeded. It just took longer than he hoped. Preston wiped his eyes. Thank you, Mr. Watkins, for saving my father, for giving me a chance, for everything. Subscribe if you're over 50 and love real justice, because moments like this are why this courtroom became sacred to so many people. Judge Caprio leaned forward. Mr. Hale, I want to leave you with something. You walked into this courtroom 5 months ago and refused to stand. You believed your wealth made you better than everyone in this room. You endangered a man who saved your father's life and felt no remorse. I was wrong about everything. You were. But being wrong isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. Your father spent his life trying to repay a debt he felt he could never settle. You have the chance to continue that work, to honor his memory not with foundations and checks, but with the way you treat people every single day. I will, Your Honor, I promise. Good, because Harold Watkins and every veteran like him deserves better than the man you were. They deserve the man you're becoming. Judge Caprio picked up his gavel. Case closed, Mr. Hale. But remember, wealth is not authority, and respect is not something you can buy. It's something you earn, one act of decency at a time. I understand, Your Honor, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life earning it. The gavel fell. And in a Providence courtroom, a man who had once refused to stand for a judge learned to stand for something far more important, the dignity of every human being, regardless of wealth, status, or power. Dramatization for storytelling and education, not legal advice or reporting.